Awesome. Hi, my name is Emmanuel. I am one of the co-founders of Grady and Boost. Grady and Boost is a platform that helps users learn, get upskilled, and get jobs in data science, data engineering, DevOps, and software engineering through mentor-guided projects. We partner with experienced professionals and companies to create projects on our platform simulating real-world tasks, enabling you to work on projects that simulate real-world tasks to give you experience, essentially. Today, we have Victor Palacios, one of the project creators on our platform. Do you want to do a quick intro regarding yourself and your background, Victor?
Yeah, hi, my name is Victor Palacios. Let's see here. So I originally wanted to get into data science about 4 years ago. And so I went to a boot camp, and it's funny because Emmanuel was actually part of that boot camp as well. And I got to do my own project. And so I decided a topic that I thought was really interesting, and it was kind of niche, and it was in natural language processing. From there, I went on to a master's program in data science. And then I completed about 3 part-time jobs. I wrote a paper, and now I work as a full-time data scientist, and I'm really excited to kind of launch a product where I help people do what I was trying to do many years ago.
Awesome. A quick question on that. Like, what did you find the most difficult part of the journey to get your first data science role?
Oh man, the most difficult part was, I'm wondering if it was the ATS, the applicant tracking system, which will parse your, it's funny because I want to do a natural language processing project, and the ATS is kind of a parser. So it will go through your resume and find out, the keywords like Google or Apple. If you don't have those keywords, sometimes it's harder to get a job, I guess. So in my cohort, there was about 80 students from my master's degree program. And this is the University of San Francisco. And I went through about 800 applications trying to figure out, what is my first job going to be like? Do I like that company or not? And I guess that journey was really interesting for me because I thought, okay, I have a lot of experience and I have a lot of cool projects to talk about. And it was still really tough to get that first step to the door. But once I got that first step to the door, I was able to get a job. So I think the biggest hurdle there is like, how do you make your resume as appealing as possible to that applicant tracking system and then to the human as well, seeing it? And so that is really something that I would like to emphasize in my course. Like when you put a project, like say if you do my project, how do you then put that on your resume? How do you highlight that, yeah, you did Python, you did Spacey, you did NLP, but what was the point of that project? And how can you apply that to something in that company?
Got you. So do you want to give us a high-level walkthrough regarding your project? What does the project entail, and what will the person doing the project expect to learn throughout the process?
Yeah, so this is a project I've iterated over several times, even in my master's degree program, because I thought it was so interesting. And it's deception detection. So what we'll be looking at is first how do we get our own data that is based on lies and truths that people tell? And then can we build a model that can tell the difference between the two? And so this is heavily on text processing, which is a subset in the machine learning field. And so if you learn these skills here, you still have the skills that are necessary for, a more basic data science project. Whereas most people will start with, the Titanic data set, or for example, doing that flowers data set with like iris, etc. Here, what I want to do is have an introductory course into natural language processing. And so it's engaging and fun because the topic is something that I think everybody cares about. When is this person telling a lie to me? When are they telling me the truth? And so what we'll do is walk through the data science lifecycle. So we'll look at data acquisition, and we'll do that is particularly through web scraping. So I don't want to give you a data set that you can just use right away, because that's often something that's negative in an interview. You should be able to say on at least one of your projects that you found the data yourself, or at least that you obtained the data yourself somehow. And then walking through data exploration. So looking at these sentences and actually spending time to do a subsample. So maybe if you downloaded 20,000 lines of text, you might not have the ability or resources to read them all. Okay, but how do you then check that the quality of the text that you're dealing with is high quality? Because if you have low quality text and low quality labeling, then you're going to have a low quality model. Afterwards, we'll then step into data preprocessing. So this will be fixing those errors that we found in the exploration stage. And then we'll do baseline modeling. So what I found in most of these interviews that I've done was that people want to talk about logistic regression, linear regression, and random forests. In this case, we're going to be doing a classification problem. So it's going to be, we're going to focus on logistic regression and random forests. And those are the two that I just found interviewer after interviewer wanted to know about those. And then we'll do feature engineering, which is to say we'll create new variables that were not part of the original data set. But this is one of the more important jobs of the data scientist is that, yeah, you have a baseline model, it's performing at 60% accuracy. How do you get it to go a little bit higher than that? What can you extract from the data that wasn't given to you? And again, these are the skills that interviewers are looking for. They really want to know how high is your creativity? What did you do to make this data set that was simple originally something more complex? Then from there, you can do your final modeling and say, okay, I was getting this kind of accuracy or raw KUC score, and now I'm getting this score because I did X, Y, and Z.
Okay, so you mentioned the value of obtaining your own data when it comes to interviews. What exactly, like what does it add to your interview process? What is the value of that exactly in an interview to have obtained your own data in the project?
Sorry, could you say that first part again? I couldn't.
So it's a question regarding like what is the value of obtaining your own data in an interview? How does it help you in an interview essentially for a project?
Sorry, are you saying the quality of the data?
No, so you mentioned that in at least one of the projects that you have, you ideally want to acquire your own data. What is the value of going through the process of acquiring your own data? Does it help you when it comes to the actual work you do? Does it help you when it comes to the interview process? How does it help you essentially?
I can't hear.
It's a bit of a long question. Okay.
Yeah, it's like there's a slight echo. Sorry.
All right, sorry about that. So I'm asking regarding the acquisition of data. What is the value of acquiring your own data in the project? How does that help you essentially?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. So when you acquire your own data, it shows initiative. And this is something that all companies want to see. They want to know that you're not someone who's going to passively wait for something to come to you. You're going to say, no, I can go out and get it myself. And so in this case, for example, when I first started this project, there were no data sets that were specific to data deception detection, should I say. And so I wanted that, and I wanted to explore that field. And so when you're in the job market and say you're doing marketing, for example, and there is no data set that deals with what you want to do, okay, how do you grab that from a website? And that particular skill itself, just the web scraping skill, even if it's very basic, can help you then stand out amongst people who just did Kaggle competitions, or in their master's program, all they did was take data and they didn't find it.
Okay, and you mentioned low quality text and high quality text. Do you mind just elaborating what you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so let's say, for example, that you are dealing, so I've read papers where people also dealt with deception detection, but what they had actually was a bunch of text created by students or by helpers. And so they created these sentences, and then they evaluated whether a model could determine between truth and false. But here, these are more, how should I say it? They're not realistic. So it's not captured from like actual speech, but from something that someone just made up in their spare time. And so what is the quality of that data? How do you assess it? Do you think it's high quality or low quality? So I would just read the sentence, for example. Or if we're looking at like the case of fraud, which is very similar to deception detection, then for example, fraudulent Amazon reviews, you might see that the fraudulent ones tend to have more typos, or they tend to be written in all capital letters, really weird things like that. And that affects the model's ability to predict depending on what you're doing. So for example, you have fraud data and non-fraud data, and all the fraud data is written in like broken English, or it's written with repetitive wording, or it has like the word spam in it, or money, or something to that effect. And so that tells your model that this is spam. And so it's not actually, your model actually hasn't picked up on anything unique or interesting. It just used the simplest things possible there to do that. And so you look at that data and you go, is that really high quality data though? Should I be reporting the results of this, given that this initial data that I dealt with wasn't actually good quality?
Okay, got you. And you mentioned that when it comes to the interview process, you typically ask questions about logistic regression and random forest. My question is that it's very easy to take sklearn, for example, to build a model. But obviously, there's more to building models than just understanding sklearn. So to kind of understand a bit better, what level of detail do you need to understand to communicate about about, for example, random forest in an interview? What level of detail do you expect people going through this project to understand about the models they're using, essentially?
Yeah, so for these ones, these are the most basic models and the most commonly used, and they'll be used even by, for example, a real company, right? Because some people will come to you and they'll say, I don't want to use anything that's more complicated than linear regression. Okay, so that means that if there's that kind of business person, then they might also turn around and say, please explain linear regression to me in excruciating detail. And so you need to know all of the different facets of that. The same with the random forest, because it's one of the more interesting models, and it's built off of another model, the decision tree. So in the course that I would teach, I would also go into what is a decision tree, because you would need that baseline knowledge to talk about the random forest. And so in some of my interviews, it's just very basic, like, what is a random forest? Why is it better or worse than a decision tree? Why is that? And then how does the decision tree, oh, sorry about that. Let me turn the mic off. Yeah, and another one would be like, so for example, how does the decision tree make its decisions? And then from there, you would have to go into the mathematics of, for example, entropy or something. And this is really a case by case. Not everyone will go into this level of detail. And you might even get those trick interview questions where they're trying to see if you will make things up. Like if you're not really sure about it and you start saying random things, and then right then that's a sign that you're not someone to be hired. In reverse though, let's say they do go into that level of detail and you have studied it and you can like code it, for example, from scratch, but you don't know the exact mathematics behind it, or you don't remember it. That's when you need to say like, that part I'm a little fuzzy on. I could go ahead and research it and get back to you on it, but just don't give fake answers for those ones. So yeah, the level of detail is definitely case by case, but I would say that you should know them in and out. You should know how to build it from scratch and explain that building, let's see, on a high level. I'm not saying you have to code them from scratch. That's kind of silly because they exist, like you said, in sklearn. But I am saying that on a theoretical level, you need to understand the different steps that enable us to make a random forest.
Okay, and for this particular project, what do you define as success? Like, what is a successful completion for you, essentially, for a user?
Yeah, I think it would be being able to do a different project using a different data set, but with this kind of skeleton. So what I want to be able to enable users to do is say, okay, now I know basic natural language processing. And if I wanted to do something for my company, for example, your company has like a bunch of PDFs and they want you to get some data from those PDFs, right? How do I extract that data? What value does it have to me? How do I visualize this? What is important in a natural language processing task? Oh, how do I evaluate that this is a good model or a bad model? So I think going through this course, the endpoint is like when you can say, I'm finished and I think I'm good, is you can actually start a new project by yourself.
Okay.
And I'll recommend those.
What are the typical challenges you expect a user to encounter when building a model to detect deception, essentially?
Yeah, so one of the main things that we'll talk about is the data quality. And so how do we think about the fact that we are taking these sentences from such and such website? Is this website tilted towards a certain audience such that our results are actually not generalizable? Or are they generalizable because they're from this website, which does this and this? So does it fit your domain? And then, for example, when you're doing this kind of work with, especially with deception detection, it's some of the sentences are hearsay. So I heard that the president said this. And then other sentences are President Trump, and then what he actually said. And so how do you differentiate those two? Are those actually two sentences that you should be combining in the same data set or not? And so how do we think about this? And so when you do your own natural language processing task, then you have to figure out when I get this data or how I deal with this data is going to directly impact the results. And I have to be able to explain that to other people. Like, I did this data and you told me to do it, but I found this and this, which is an important skill for a data scientist.
Okay, I think one question I had to follow on. Sorry, you're still talking, sorry.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's okay.
So how do you deal with ambiguity? So for example, you can imagine a scenario where you have a sentence that is at least partially true, but partially false. Like what happens in that particular scenario?
Yeah, exactly. So that's something, that's a really cool topic. So here, for example, when we are getting this data, they're going to be labeled as having being completely true, completely false, and being somewhere in this ambiguous relationship. And then part of the data preprocessing is to say, do I want to deal with this data? Because how am I going to be able to explain the results of that? And so, for example, in the first pass, what we'll do is completely filter on the data that we think is important, which is completely truthful data that has been validated by 3 parties, or completely false data, which has again been validated by 3 parties.
Okay, got you. Any questions from your side, Stephen, can ask?
Yeah, hi, Victor. On my end, I think it's really, I want to understand the scope of the project in terms of, where are the learners going to just talk about model building, or, is there something beyond that? And I think my second question is really around what the thought process is around model selection. Would they just, maybe for a natural language processing task, would they just select random forest as a model, or there's an assumption that you have to make before you can select the model? How's that process like? Those are my 2 questions.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question, I'll ask you to repeat that in a second, but let me do the second one because I can answer that one. And so the model process is really something that you will decide with your company or with your client. So some people will, like I said, will say, I don't want to deal with anything complex or something that doesn't have coefficients. So then you'll have to stick to logistic regression. In the other case where I'm allowed to choose, for example, then I want to build a baseline model, which will help me establish, what is normal, should I say. So I would say logistic regression is a great baseline model. And then I would do something a little bit more complex, for example, a decision tree. And then from there, I would do a random forest. Then I would look at all 3 results and see which performs best, what level of explainability is demanded from me by the client, for example, or from my boss. And then what about speed? Like if it takes me, let's say 80 hours to train that random forest, it takes me 1 hour to train the decision tree, and there's only 1% or 2% difference in them, then I'm not going to go for the random forest, even though it is a better model, because it's not fast. So speed is also something that we have to take into consideration. So I would say overall, you have to consider 2 things, and that's complexity that is allowed for you, and the speed, because that's also a limitation. Oh, sorry. And then can you tell me your first question again?
Awesome. Yeah. So for listeners who haven't viewed the project yet, what's the scope of the project in this case? Is it like, are they just going to stop at model building, or, what's the scope for that?
Yeah, so this project is pretty big in itself, and I'd like it to be introductory. So someone who's like not sure if they're interested in text processing or not, but they'd like to try it out, and so wet their toes. And so I will go from data acquisition, exploration, pre-processing, model building, and then we will do advanced model building, and then we will stop there. Then depending on the popularity, say a lot of people really like the course and I get a lot of positive feedback, then we can think about next steps where we do something that is far more complex. So maybe like a medium level or a high level. And so at first this is going to be an intro. So I'm going to say it's a low level, very wet your feet kind of course. But if people really like it, then we can say something like, okay, how do we maybe make a static website where someone can enter in a sentence, and then the output is the prediction on whether or not it is a truthful sentence or a false sentence. And then what if you don't just want to stick to these regular machine learning models? Because in text processing, what happens typically is that we will use deep learning instead. But that's a whole nother topic in and of itself, which will probably take just as long to complete as it will just for this introductory course.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Okay.
So we always hear about the idea that you must have a baseline model, like a benchmark model rather, and then build more complex models after, then compare them with your benchmark model. What is the value behind that? Starting with the more simple model and build more complexity after that. What's the value of that process?
Yeah, so the first one is a sanity check. I think that's always my go-to, is to figure out whether or not what I'm doing makes sense. Like if I'm getting, for example, 60% with logistic regression, and I'm getting 50% or 40% with random forest, I could have made some kind of mistake, because typically your random forest models are going to outperform your logistic regression models. It's not always the case, it's just a typical. So then I would double check that I'm doing my work correctly. And then you can also compare that with the decision tree, which is also a more simple model. And so it usually does not outperform the random forest, but there are those edge cases where it may. And so this is a sanity check. The next thing is you need to also compare, like I was telling you about earlier, the speed. So how long does it take to train the baseline model? And then how long does it take to train a more complex model? Is that trade-off worth it? Is the speed versus the amount of accuracy that it's going to capture worth it? So it takes me 20 more hours to train that random forest model, but it also gives me 20% more accuracy or a better ROC AUC score. Well, okay, then I obviously am going to go for the more complex model in that case.
Okay, and just final two questions. When it comes to, so I forgot the question, sorry about that. When it comes to the timeline we've got in this project, how long do you expect someone to take to complete this project?
Oh yeah, when I first did this project took me 6 months, I think. And so what I want to do is streamline it so that anyone can come into it. And if you take your time with it, maybe 3 months, if you're like really on it and you're fast about it and you don't rely too heavily on any notes that I will provide, then maybe a month. But if you're like, I'm just going to look at the notes to do this, a week, I guess. But it depends on your level of comfort and how deep you want to dive into it. Because when I first started, I really wanted to dive deep into what is text processing, because I felt like that's a huge area in terms of like, what do employers need, for example? Like, people don't know that you can use text in order to figure out things that you might not have known before. For example, if we're looking at the idea of sentiment analysis, where people just look at, is this a positive sentence or a negative sentence, which is really not that hard to do, right? I just look for positive words or negative words. But let's say, for example, I have this company, your company, for example. I go on Twitter, I find the most 500 most recently posted tweets, and I look and I do sentiment analysis. I label them positive or negative. Then I go to the negative tweets, and I look at what people complain about. And then from there, I tell that to marketing, like, hey, marketing, look at these questions that we had. Or maybe marketing was the one who found it. They come to me, who's, for example, I'm a software engineer, and they're saying, can you fix these problems with it? And so then that's direct impact on your company from a task that they might have, or like from a skill set that they might not have known that they needed. And so I feel like NLP is really, really important, because most of what we do nowadays, it's all written somewhere. And so all you have to do is find that, and then you can generate value for your company. And so, yeah, I hope to give that skill set to people through this fun project, and then for them to be able to do something like sentiment analysis and know how to correctly deal with that data.
Okay, the question I had is regarding the feature engineering stage. Is there any additional reading one can do to gain more context, to just become better in feature engineering in this particular project?
Yeah, so when I first started, there was not a lot on that. But now you can go to Kaggle, for example, and they have their own feature engineering like section, which they'll teach you about. In this course as well, like we'll also talk about what does it mean to feature engineer? How do you do that in natural language processing? Because it's not the same as, for example, dealing with something like the Titanic data set where, or actually, let's just say we have two features and they are height and your weight, right? I can combine those two features and I can get BMI. With a little bit of math. And so that's easy, right? Because it's just numeric, and then you combine it and I get another numeric column. But what about text, right? There isn't as much numeric stuff going on there. So how do we generate numeric values from that? And then how do we combine things in order to make new things? Or how do I label this in order to get what I need?
Okay, as a final question, like what people expect from the videos that they get from you when they unlock the project? What level of detail can they expect regarding the logic you followed building a particular project?
So I really think this is going to be an evolving project where I will go through and iterate what I think are the most important steps for you as a beginning data scientist or introductory into the world of natural language processing. And I'll highlight, for example, like, here is this concept and here is how it is asked, usually in an interview, or here's how you can explain it in an interview in order to sound more viable to that company. But I think I will try to go into the detail level that an interview might expect you to go into without going into, you know, the granular mathematics that most people won't even ask you about. And at the same time, you're a data scientist, not a mathematician or not a software engineer. And so your goal really should be on solving a problem for the company And so I'm going to talk about this particular tool will solve this problem in this way, and then maybe give you some high level on it. And if people want to talk more about the details, we can maybe have chats on it, or I'm not sure how this site will operate, but something iterative. So maybe if the people think I can fix those videos, then go back and fix the videos or rewrite them for more detail.
Awesome. Victor, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.